And we're back with our video sit-downs for primary election 2013. Jay Hupp is across the table from me on camera. I'm Diedrich Allen off camera. Jay is the incumbent for Port of Shelton Commissioner, position number 3.
Yes.
And Jay, take a few minutes to tell everybody about you, your background, why you're running, and why you feel you're the best candidate.
You bet. I'm Jay Hupp. I am a commissioner at the Port of Shelton, one of the 3 commissioners out there now. I've been there for about 5.5 years. I'm rerunning for re-election. Want to remain in the seat. The job itself is, the mission of the Port is very, very compatible with what my focus and professional involvement has been for almost 3 decades in this community and the surrounding community. And how that connection takes place is the mission of the Port basically is to take tax money, invest that tax money in infrastructure and facilities, and make those facilities available for business development, and that results in job growth. That's the essence of what the Port is all about, what ports in the state of Washington are all about. My background is, and I fell into that kind of work when I first came to this community better than 3 decades ago. I was appointed to the Planning Commission, was appointed to the Shoreline Advisory Board, was elected to the Board of Directors for the Mason County Economic Development Council, and I worked those 3 areas for, I don't know, 3 to 5 years. I forget just exactly what it was. But eventually, I dropped all of that and went onto the payroll for the Economic Development Council, and then got serious about economic development work and business development, and oriented towards job creation. And in that work, I was involved in things like the Columbia Pacific Resource Conservation and Economic Development District. We'll probably have to back up and edit this out, right?
Well, it is being on live, but we'll do our best. Go ahead.
Okay.
Continue.
The Columbia Pacific Resource Conservation and Economic Development Council, which was in fact is today a 4-county federally sponsored economic development effort. I chaired the Economic Development Committee for that council for 6 years. I sat on the Washington State Rural Development Council for 7 years, and that's a statewide look at economic development and business development across the state, particularly in rural areas. And then when PUD 3 decided to finance the broadband fiber optics wiring of this entire area, actually, the fiber that they bought actually facilitates the broadband that goes into Kitsap County too. But anyway, there was a need to put a committee together to look at how broadband would be installed in Mason County, and I created that committee and chaired that committee for about 3 years. The end result of that is that this community is probably the most or best wired broadband community in the United States, and a lot of people don't believe that. They don't understand that if you take a dart and throw it at a map of Mason County and take another dart and throw it at Thurston County, your likelihood of hitting a spot that has broadband at Mason County is better than it is in Thurston County. It turned into a phenomenal project. So the other things that happened with that involvement was a number of businesses that came to Mason County, a number of businesses that were retained in Mason County, and quite frankly, a number of those businesses today still exist and are alive and well and operating out of the port. And so that's what I've been involved in. That's what I do. That's where my heart is. My wife will tell you I pay too much attention to it. So that's why I'm running for re-election.
Okay. So the issue that seems to be most on the minds of the people are the fairgrounds. Now, it has been said time and time again that the fairgrounds property can be rented on an event-by-event, short-term basis as long as the port gets fair market value for the property. If re-elected, would you propose changing that so the Mason Area Fair rodeo and Oyster Fest can continue on the property on the long term, how do you propose to pay for the maintenance and operation of the facility?
Well, a short answer to that is I will encourage and back anything that fosters the perpetuation of that fairgrounds where it's at and enhances the opportunity for it to grow and thrive. And now that the ownership of the buildings is in the hands of the port as opposed to the county, in my mind, that is really no different than any other building that belongs to the port. If for example, if we build a building out there, the port doesn't run the business that goes into that building. It just makes the building available for the business to operate. And in my mind, the same thing happens with the fairgrounds. We own the dirt, we own the buildings, and if somebody wants to come out and lease them at fair market value, then that's what ought to happen. Now, beyond that, there are provisions in the federal FAA regulations that encourage a relationship between the community and the airport that from time to time would call for a reduction or a break in the lease rate, even though all we hear from seems to be out of Seattle that it's got to be at fair market value and that's the end of the gavel. But in fact, if you go into their compliance regulations, you find that there is emphatic encouragement on the part of the FAA for communities to do whatever is necessary to develop a compatible relationship between the airport and the community. So a reduction in fees moves in that direction. I would be more than happy, and in fact I will encourage it. Now, beyond that, if this community should decide to relocate those fairgrounds, I certainly wouldn't be opposed to it. If that effort comes about and it looks like it's a live, living, breathing animal that is going to live, I would do everything I can to nurture it. But I wouldn't do anything that would force those fairgrounds off that property, because the basic 40 acres that was given to the county to form a fairgrounds dates back to 1926. I think this is about the 105th year of fair in Mason County, and what is out there is the best of what this county's been able to do in 105 years, and I'm not a bit ashamed of it, and I don't think anybody else in this county ought to be ashamed of it either. Beyond that, if people are more interested or have a further interest in depth in that subject, I've published a research paper on it that's available on my website. You can go to jhupp.info and read it in its entirety. If you want to send me an email at jhupp@comcast.net, you can do that, and I'll respond to that. But any way that I can further understanding of this subject within this community and back the perpetuation of the survival of those fairgrounds, I'll do it with my heart, soul, and my wallet.
Okay. Now, moving on to the next question.
Okay.
How important is it to you to maintain Oakland Bay Marina? Do you think these costs should be borne by the users of the marina or by all port taxpayers? Would you like to see more commercial activity at the marina? Do you think there is enough interest in expanding the marina, allowing more commercial and or recreational use?
Well, the marina is a public facility like all the port facilities are. It's under Washington State statute. There has to be an opportunity to share in the public facility, whether it be a private venture or whether it be a just public access. So as long as that marina is owned by the port, it has to be a public marina. Now, given that at least half of the boat slips have got to be open to the public for rent to anybody that walks in, and that has been the intent and policy of the port forever down there. A lot of people feel that the marina is under a lot more direction and ownership of the yacht club than it actually is. The direction and ownership of that marina is port. Now, to answer the question of who should pay for it, that's an interesting question, because it can be applied to anything that the port does, because what happens in this county, given that we have a port that doesn't cover the entire county, whatever we do is paid for by about 40% of the taxpayers that are within the Port of Shelton district. And even the other 4 port districts don't cover the entire county. So whereas if let's say you only have one port district in a county, like Grays Harbor County or Thurston County, whatever the port does, the expense is shared by the taxpayers of the entire county, and that's not the case here. So to back down to who should pay for it, it goes to any of our facilities, and it's a public facility, and the expectation is that everybody gets to use it, whether they're a taxpayer within the district or not. And that's pretty much, that expectation is served by the port, and it always has, or has been. So the marina, the fairgrounds, whatever else we do is pretty much open to everybody, not only within the Mason County, but the expense is borne by those taxpayers that are within the port district. But that's not totally true either, because we, over the years, have been able to turn the Port of Shelton district into a port district that does not survive only on tax dollars. The vast majority of the money that flows into that port is not from tax dollars. It's from a return on the investment in facilities and infrastructure that is leased out, and that returns money back. So it's an investment that is in the black, and so I don't know if that answers your question on who should pay for it, but pretty much everybody gets involved in it.
Okay, what about the commercial activity?
Commercial activity. Historically, if you think back to what that marina was in its origin, it was the boat dock for Shelton when this area was being logged. There used to be a couple of stern wheelers that went back and forth between here and Olympia. And it was the only transportation between here and Olympia. There was no road when things first started, and there was no road for a long time. So it was a commercial dock. Now, it wasn't located exactly where it is now, but conceptually, the marina on Oakland Bay was the transportation hub of Mason County, and particularly Shelton. And so its commercial origin has been changed a little bit in that it has gone to recreation and tourism for the past 40, 50 years, and people have gotten into the frame of mind that that's all that it should be. Well, I think a little bit differently towards it. I think everything that the port does should be oriented toward, again, creating jobs. And when the issue comes up as to whether we can facilitate some commercial operation in the marina area, I emphatically say yes. And there's plenty of room down there to share and for people to get along, and actually some business money working in the marina down there will work in the direction of bettering the marina. So it's a compatible relationship. It creates jobs, and I say, yeah, let's go with it.
Okay. Moving on to the next question I have. Do you have a specific vision for each port property?
Well, we start with Sanderson Field. There's 1,000 acres up there at Sanderson Field. Only about, less than 500, less than half of the property at Sanderson is actually encompassed within the runways and the taxiways and the parking ramps and dedicated to pure aviation activity. The rest of it is open to business development, and it's most of it is well served by water, power, fiber optics, roads, septic. At some point, we would like to get the port onto its own or connected to a sewer system so that it comes off of that septic. But that's a matter of economics. At what time do you give up a good operating septic system to hook up to a sewer? Well, you probably do that at a time when you have a business that comes in that has to be hooked to a sewer. I mean, those things happen, and eventually I see that there will be sewer connection up there, but I wouldn't predict just when or how it will happen. So I see Sanderson Field continuing to operate in the manner in which it has in the past, where there's opportunities to build facilities, develop facilities, grow facilities, and it's a nice campus. I mean, when I don't know if you sat through the PowerPoint presentation that I gave
did.
a couple of weeks ago when I compared Port of Chehalis and Port of Centralia and Grays Harbor, SATSA Park Development in Bremerton. And when you look at the Sanderson Field Business Park at the Port of Shelton, it competes with everybody around. I mean, visually and infrastructure-wise. Shifting out to Johns Prairie, that's not necessarily the case out there. There's some less than desirable visual impacts that have accumulated out at Johns Prairie. There's a great effort going on right now to reverse that less than desirable visual impact. There's a great effort, and there's been great progress made in the last couple of weeks. But that always will be, in my mind, probably the heavy industry area, and it never will have the appearance of the Sanderson Field Business Park, nor should it probably. One of the things that sets out there at Johns Prairie now that I fought very hard against because of the visual impact of it was the harvesting of that 100 acres of timber. In my mind, it was an opportunity to cut some timber that there were arguments both ways, and the timber came down. I'm arguing at this point very heavily against doing the same thing to Sanderson Field. I do not want to see the visual appearance of Sanderson Field put into the same box that Johns Prairie is in right now. Development at the Oakland Bay Marina, we've discussed that a little bit to where it's going. I see development there. More in the line of maintenance and accommodation of what commercial or industrial development might develop there. There's a demand for more boat slips down there. I see in the future that would be good, in not only for the accommodation of local pleasure and tourism, but just generally from the perspective of developing the marina. So there's where I see us going.
So if you could only develop one area, which property would you focus on?
Well, I would focus on Sanderson Field. That's always been the nucleus of the port's operation, both from an economic standpoint and from a visibility standpoint and from a potential standpoint and total jobs, and it's the heart of the port, and I would continue to maintain it as the heart of the operations and reach to the other two areas to supplement that.
Now, you touched on my next question. In recruiting business and attracting businesses to the port, should the port focus on infrastructure or aesthetics?
I think they're both important. If you don't have the infrastructure that accommodates, you don't even get a second look from a business. If you're not aesthetically pleasing, you may not get a second look either. So they're both very important. But speaking of the subject of recruiting, I think the most important thing to recruiting, and I say this after almost 3 decades in the business of economic development and recruiting, the most important element in particularly in a rural area is the reputation of not only the area but the reputation of the facility that they're come in contact with. If you build a good, positive, receptive attitude within the entity within the port. Recruiting is pretty much a natural thing. Those that are there like the fact that they're there. They tell their friends, and it spreads out, and all of a sudden you've got people beating down the door. So that's really what effective recruiting in a rural community is all about. Develop a positive attitude and image and project it, and they will come.
Next subject, do you believe the port's executive director has been given too much freedom or power, if you will, with his job duties? Should the Port Commission have more say or less say in the day-to-day operations of the port?
That's a tough question, and it's a question that comes frequently into municipal corporations like the port is, where you've got three elected officials that are there to establish policy for the organization, and out of that policy flows the operation of the organization, and it falls to the hands of an executive director, if you have an executive director. In cases where you have an executive director, you delegate authority to the executive director, and you do it in writing. And so the executive director operates from a set of written rules. The commission operates from a position of oversight and responsibility for everything that goes on. And so it's very difficult to draw a clear, bright line between the responsibilities of the executive director and his staff. The staff belongs to him. He hires and fires with the staff. The commission stays out of that. It's a hard to draw a bright line. It's oftentimes a fuzzy line and a very difficult line to work with. So with that, I wouldn't say whether or not anyone has more authority than they should have or not. I say it's a very difficult issue to work, and it takes the attention of both the staff level and the commission level in order to keep it from getting tangled up.
Is there anything specific you would like to see, the port do that it currently isn't doing?
I'd like to see more emphasis on two areas. One is long-range planning. I'd like to see a serious involvement in long-range planning and a serious implementation of long-range planning. I've been pushing that issue for 5.5 years now, and I haven't gotten it to the point that I want it to be at, and that's one of the reasons I want to rerun. The second issue is communications. Communications not only within the organization, but between the organization and the community. I don't think that we are anywhere near where we need to be in transparency or in openness to input from the community, and that needs to be worked on. And again, I felt that was one of the primary reasons that I ran for the position 5.5 years ago, and it's not where I want it yet. So I want that to move.
Is there anything specific you would like to see the port stop doing or participating in?
If there were one thing that I would take off of the table today, it would be the intent to cut the timber at Sanderson Field. I don't think it's economically necessary, nor do I think that it is wise from an aesthetic standpoint.
Okay, my last question for you is how much value do you put in the port's relationship with the Economic Development Council of Eastern County?
Well, you can imagine where that goes, having worked for them for 14 years, and I'm back on the board of directors now. But from an absolutely serious and analytical standpoint, the reason I got involved with the Economic Development Council in the mid-'80s is because I come to understand that within any community there are responsibilities of municipal corporations that are oriented towards economic development that they can't possibly handle on their own, and that they will never be able to handle because of their sphere of influence. And those spheres of influence overlap and they conflict with each other. Take the county, for example, and the city, and the port and the rest of the municipal corporations within the community. If they don't all back off from that question of economic development and responsibility for economic development and create some sort of an entity that they can all support that can operate across those lines, then you don't have effective economic development within a community. When you create an entity that can operate with all of those conflicting entities, then you have an organization within the community that can do effective economic development work and can, in fact, cross those barriers that are not crossed because of conflict if the Economic Development Council were not there. Therein lies the value of an Economic Development Council, and the connection between the Economic Development Council and the Port of Shelton is very close because we deal with the same subjects doing the same thing, and it's a great relationship. And since day one when I became involved with the Economic Development Council, I have promoted and developed the relationship between the port and the EDC, and I'll continue to do so. I think it's a good, healthy relationship.
All right, Jay Hupp, candidate for Port of Shelton Commissioner, position number 3. Thanks for taking some time.
Thanks very much for the opportunity. I'm glad to be here this morning.